Hi folks, in the next episode of Musings of an Earthbound Alien, we're going to talk cars, well, more specifically drivers of cars. We're also going to look at some manufacturing issues that I think is actually causing more problems on the road. In fact, I think it's causing more distracted driving on the road. By the way, somebody else is holding the phone for me, so not to worry, I'm not distracted in that sense. But yeah, it's being a problem. It's going to be a problem, and I'll tell you why it's a problem. Anyway, that's on the next episode of Musings of an Earthbound Alien. Hi everyone, and welcome back. I guess we're going to start off with saying that this is going to be a shorter show than normal, but it's an important one. It's about distracted driving. The vast majority, Statistics Canada, Transport Canada, CAA, the American Automobile Association, at least in North America, indicate that 60 to 80%, depending on the type of accident, has been caused by distracted driving. And distracted driving is not necessarily what you think it might be. And we're also going to talk about the way that some vehicles are designed and the issue between the vehicle design and the driver. Let's start off with daytime running lights. That you wouldn't think would be an issue, but it is, and here's why. Daytime running lights became a legal requirement in September 1989 in Canada. At that time, vehicle manufacturers in Canada and those importing vehicles into Canada were required to ensure that all cars and trucks sold in this country had a bright front visible light during the day. There was no similar requirement for the tail light. The whole idea, of course, is simply to make sure that vehicles were visible. There were several crashes, high-profile crashes across the country, most of them head-on collisions that were deemed to be caused by a lack of visibility. Having your daylights on during the day was shown to increase visibility, and especially in certain types of lighting conditions. At that time, digital dashes, however, didn't really exist except for a couple of high-end vehicles that came loaded with, digital speedometers and a few other flashy knobs and whatever. Dashboards were predominantly analog. They were backlit and could be used without any dash lights coming on during the day. People entered their cars and trucks, and if it was dark out or in a storm or a fog, they automatically turned on their lights. You couldn't see ahead of you. You couldn't see your dash in the dark because it wasn't lit. I must turn on my light to be able to see these things, and they did. Fast forward just a few years and fully digital dashboards, hybrid dashboards with analog and digital indicators, so-called infotainment screens, GPSs, all come pretty much standard on almost the basic of cars, on almost all the basic of cars today. Now we have the other issue that is plaguing the highways and roadways, phantom cars. A phantom car essentially are cars that are being driven in the dark without lights. The driver, operator of the vehicle has their daytime running lights on, but zero lighting in the rear. That's because they don't have their headlights on. It's as simple as that. You don't see them if you're driving in adverse conditions until they break. Then all of a sudden you see this phantom car in front of you. For a lot of people by then, especially if you're not maintaining distance or traveling at a slower speed, to match the conditions, it's too late at that point in time. The reason for the lack of lights, and the blame for this is twofold. Manufacturers begin the process of this bad form of driving because their engineers and designers, and this goes for just about every manufacturer, have ignored the basic concept of looking at the lowest common denominator in 95% of all accidents or incidences, the driver. Car designers are either being overruled by the marketing team or run by some genius marketing team that knows nothing about ergonomic systems. They know tons about selling cars, but not about the systems that go into the design and manufacture of vehicles. And the concept I'm talking about is human factors engineering. It's also, what most people typically call ergonomics. What it comes down to is it's the science of dealing with the application of information on physical and psychological characteristics in the design of systems and devices used by humans. It sounds fancy, but the basic logic is applied to the engineering of a product that will be manipulated in some way by a human being, by you, by me, well, when I decide I'm human. And you design for the lowest common denominator. The individual getting into that vehicle may not be techie in some way or whatever, but that's the lowest common denominator, is that human. You design for that person. And yes, I know I've just offended a whole slew of drivers and operators, but too bad. Back to the issue. The marketing types, they want the fancy bells and whistles to market their vehicles. They think, and rightly so, based on the majority of what car buyers seem to look at when selecting their vehicles, is that a lot of lights, dials, and other digital knobs are best sellers. That's what people want, apparently. They push the so-called infotainment system. They somehow must have integration with the operator's cell phone, whether it's Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. Lots of digital buttons for maps, music, road and weather, information, entertainment, accepting and making so-called hands-free phone calls, the ability to read messages to you over the car audio, buttons for audiobooks, listening to podcasts, and the list goes on and on and on. The problem is that with all these lights, buttons, and knobs being lit up, operators get into their cars and trucks and automatically, immediately forget that they're driving a 2-ton plus metric ton of metal, plastic, and fabric. Now they're operating an entertainment system that will whisk them away in such comfort and style that while they sit relaxed in their rich Corinthian leathers, captain's chairs with the adjustable lumbar support and the Bluetooth speaker and the headrest while they're getting their asses massaged and toasty warm, some drivers think a lit up Christmas tree essentially on their dashboard means that all their lights are on and everything is fine, which is the farthest from the truth. That, when you're driving this 2-ton vehicle at 100 kilometers plus an hour, you don't want the distraction for other vehicles because you create that distraction, a lack of lighting. Now, it's important to use proper lighting in bad weather, but these drivers are more focused on being informed about the latest goings-on with last night's episode of some freaking reality show. And we all know from a previous episode how I feel about reality shows, but it's essentially a long-winded way to say that this is lead into the second factor for the problem of phantom cars, and that's the drivers themselves, the operators. On a positive side, Transport Canada is introducing new lighting standards to curb the problem of phantom menace vehicles. Beginning September 2021, new manufacturing standards kick in for all new cars sold in Canada and imported to Canada and stop operating without the lights in the dark. As of that point, vehicles will be required to be more visible in low light conditions. They must have one of three features. Talk about distracted driving. Hey, puppy. They either have to have the daytime running lights and tail lights that come on when the vehicle instrument panel is illuminated and the vehicle is in operation. That means they can have a daytime running light, but the tail light also has to come on, not just the daytime headlight. Or, and this is my preference, headlights, taillights, side marker lights all come on, full illumination, not high beams, but full illumination in all low light conditions. A lot of cars already have this. It's called an automatic setting on the sensors. The other option is that instrument panels will remain dark so that the driver knows to turn on the lights. When they get in, there's nothing on the dash. It's basically back to the old analog system. The problem that I have with that is, and I know manufacturers today, the way and what buyers are looking at, is the instrument panels have all sorts of information. They're basically digital today for the most part. Having the panel stay dark in the daytime so that drivers will understand at night that they should turn on their light really isn't an option. It's not a realistic option. The new rules, however, will also ensure that advanced lighting technologies that boost driver visibility will also avoid blinding drivers as they're approaching. It'll eliminate, for example, the sun-bright headlights that are aimed right at the eye line of oncoming drivers. We've all seen this. There'll still be hundreds of cars, not thousands of cars, on the roadway and drivers that will cause phantom vehicle issues when this comes in September 2021. It's inevitable. It's only applied to new vehicles. But at least it's a beginning. It's a start. There's also going to be a public service blitz, a public information blitz around the same time to inform forgetful, distracted, and unaware drivers to turn on your headlights. It's not difficult. When you get into the vehicle, especially in dark weather, bad weather, turn on the headlights. It's not that hard. Another area, however, that I also flag as an issue as far as distracted driving is again caused by vehicle manufacturers and drivers. It's a combination of both. I did an informal and yes, totally unscientific survey of drivers and their knowledge of their own vehicles that they're operating. These were not new cars or trucks. There was a couple, I should say, that were relatively new to the owners. The rest had been owned for various lengths of time. What I found was, and this was over like a 2-3 month period when I came up with the idea of doing this show, that, and it was at two malls, Bayshore and Westgate Shopping Center in Ottawa. And what I found was an average of 30% of the drivers didn't know how their cars actually functioned. There was a certain lack of understanding about the systems in their vehicles. And I'm talking about things like light switches, heating controls, the infotainment system, traction controls, cruise and other functionality of their favorite method of transportation. Some couldn't even tell me how the parking brake worked, and others had to hunt and feel for the gas filler cap, the release mechanism for that. And by the way, parking brakes, okay, seriously, I don't believe I have to tell people how a parking brake works. You depress your normal brake with your right foot and either with your hand or your left foot, depending on the type of parking brake you have, you then apply that brake. You do not apply the parking brake without depressing your regular foot brake, your regular brake, because it's a mechanical system. You'll actually stretch the cables out on these cars if you do it, and the parking brake becomes useless at that point in time. Now, back to what I was saying. Warning lights, for example, also were a problem, where things like the oil change light, service engine light, TPS, etc., people didn't understand that. Over half the people I spoke with couldn't even tell me how to operate or what the TPS indicator was. I mean, questions or the responses I got for the most part was, as far as the park and brake issue, it's an automatic. Why do I need to put on the park and brake when the car isn't going anywhere once I have it in park? Or the other excuse was, I really don't use those devices, gadgets, whatever, enough to get used to what they actually are. Or with respect to the engine warning light, I just bring it into the garage and let them deal with it. It's great. Glad you have tons of money to do that when you pay for the hourly wage, just to figure out that you left your gas cap off, and that's why you have an engine warning light. My point is that all these things now start to become a distraction. Distractions are not just things that keep you from paying attention to the road as you drive. I also consider distractions to include anything that removes you, the operator, from being fully in charge of that 2-ton vehicle. For example, things that are being put in the vehicles today: lane assist, backup cameras, forward collision warning, automatic brake-in, pedestrian brake-in, adaptive lighting, blind spot detection, parking assist, and a considerably basic so-called self-driving capabilities. Just as a reminder, these self-driving vehicles like Tesla and even Uber was experimenting. There were some very high-profile accidents where people had flipped on the switch for these self-driving cars, decided to drive them around, and because they felt that, well, the car is driving and it's worked up to now, why should I bother paying attention? I'll read my newspaper, I'll make a phone call, I'll send a text, I'll do whatever, and then they hit and kill somebody. It's happened more than once. Or they had a collision with another vehicle. It's happened more than once with these self-driving cars. They're not at the level at this point in time where the AI can do that. As a matter of fact, while I'm all for these innovations and more, and some government and non-government agencies that focus on traffic safety are actively pushing for some of these features, but the problem is that there's a certain reality that none of the car companies and agencies that push these gadgets can admit to. And that's that until all vehicles across the board are equipped with these features, roads are becoming less safe by having some of these cars equipped with these features. And the reason for that is you, the human factor. It's that simple. None of the AI and algorithms that go into the software that operate these fancy gadgets, whether it's self-driving or all of these lane assists or anything like that, parking assist, none of them will ever be able to predict now how the other human controlled cars and trucks are going to react on the highway in any given situation. And that is a dangerous factor. Every one of these so-called human factor operators already know so little about their own vehicles that they're being lulled into a false sense of security with all these fancy gadgets. Every one of these features also cause the operator to assume that they don't have to turn their heads to check their blind spots. For example, if you're driving, I have a lane indicator in my car. If there's somebody beside me or in my so-called blind spot, then I don't have to worry about it. Turn your head. That's what you have to do. Don't rely on the little lights that come on your dash or, on your rear view mirror. Don't rely on them. I ride a motorcycle. I know a number of people that ride motorcycles, including my ex, including my son. I have friends that ride motorcycles, and they see this all the time, that lane assists don't actually tell you if there's a motorcycle. It might, but there's a pretty good chance that it's going to miss that bike. You can't depend on the technology in your car. You, the operator, need to be the operator. And with this stuff around them, drivers are just not paying close enough attention. They're far more willing to be distracted, by the way, by other frivolous things rather than being the driver, where you need 100% of your attention. There was a study done, and you can read it in the Washington Post, and you can read the exact same study, but the American Automobile Association, over a period of time, did a study with a number of drivers in a couple of different areas. And they took drivers that had these bells and whistles in their vehicles, that had been driving them for a long time, and they took brand new drivers and gave them these same vehicles with the bells and whistles. And it's interesting, what they found is that those drivers that had the bells and whistles over a period of time were far more likely to become distracted, because they've become used to driving with these things. They've had these gadgets, so they're assuming these things will work all the time. It doesn't, because more accidents happen that way. The newer drivers initially found that, well, they didn't necessarily trust the gadgets right away, so they did rely on turning their heads, looking behind them when they're backing up, not just relying on the backup camera. But they did all these things until they began to get used to oh, isn't that convenient? And then they started to rely on these things. And then they started having the accidents. This is a problem, and I blame both the buyers of these vehicles, the operators of these vehicles, and I blame the manufacturers. And the manufacturers, it's not the engineers and designers that I'm blaming. They're being told to incorporate this crap by the friggin' marketing groups. It's the marketing teams that are trying to sell this crap. And they're the ones that are causing more of the problems by incorporating this stuff without caring how it actually works at the end user level. You know, and these drivers, by the way, they don't worry about learning how to drive and operate that 2-ton vehicle, because again, they assume that these gadgets will do it for them. I've seen on a daily basis people that can't parallel park. I'll sit in a coffee shop with my friends and we are laughing our heads off watching these people try and park. And it's like, okay, please, if you cannot park a vehicle, if you can't parallel park or even park in a straight line, don't drive or back up. Again, people rely on these things. They don't turn their head to use their mirrors. You got 3 mirrors to use. In some trucks or vehicles that have a obstruction in the back, you only have 2 mirrors to use. But you also have your head. You can turn, you can look, make sure your blind spots are clear. Don't rely on the camera. They have no clue the distance between where they sit to the front of their vehicle and the rear of their vehicle. They have no idea. And in a parking lot, that becomes a dangerous thing. And parking lots, by the way, have, especially this time of year, around the so-called holidays, you're far more likely to have an accident. Which, as a side point, what I will tell every single driver out there is, do not drive into a parking spot. Back into a parking spot, drive out. Driving out from a parking spot when you're done your shopping, that is the safest way, because you can see vehicles coming from either side. Backing up, you cannot until your vehicle is already out in the middle. And you've already run over somebody because you didn't see that person in your blind spot because you're watching the damn camera instead of turning your head. You know, I've seen people on a daily basis on the highways as I'm heading to the office when I'm not working from home, try to tune their radios or GPS while driving. They're doing everything from shaving to makeup to combing their hair to picking their eyebrows or whatever the hell they're picking. They're chatting with their co-drivers. They're telling their kids to shut the frack up. They're waving their hands about as they talk on their mobiles. It might be hands-free, but you're still being distracted because you're chatting on with somebody else instead of paying attention to what you're doing. Or you're worse, you've got your cell phone in your hand on speaker instead of integrating it with the vehicle audio system through Bluetooth, and you're waving that around as you chat. That's not hands-free, you idiots that are doing this. Stop that. I'm sick and tired of seeing this stuff. It's stupid. You know, they never bother to pair the Bluetooth. Well, if you don't know how, don't use the phone. Turn off the phone, put it in the back seat, put it in the trunk. I don't care. Leave it stop using it as a distraction. It astounds me to think how many people are so clueless to not only drive with all these distractions, they think because of these technological marvels that that's not a distraction. They put these things in cars to avoid distractions. They are the distraction, not just you. And if you don't understand the basic idea or the basic concept of how these things even work, it even becomes more of a distraction. Unless all vehicles are equipped with the ability to self-drive, none should have the feature to self-drive, because we are all at risk by the humans behind the wheel that are being distracted by the shiny buttons and sales pitches and what they think are cars and trucks that can do without them. Driving is not a privilege, people, that you should take for granted. It is a privilege that you should be very mindful of. It's not a right by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a privilege that also comes with basic required skills and responsibility. Once you negate that responsibility, I believe personally that you should lose the privilege of being able to operate a motor vehicle. And while I can see some technological innovations to assist the driver operator in being incorporated into a car or truck, you know, things like heads-up displays, better types of lighting, operator fatigue warnings, lane departure even, but with limits, blind spot warnings, things like that should be encouraged as standard. But all of the other bells and gadgets and whistles and infotainment and all the rest of it that distract the driver, they need to go. It's that simple. Anyway, that's my pitch for safe driving. Take it or leave it. If you're an engineer or a designer at one of these car companies, stop listening to the marketing people. Stop incorporating this crap and start redesigning vehicles to be better for the end user. And that's the problem, the end user. Because the end user, you, the operator of these vehicles, stop fidgeting with this crap. Stop pretending that you know what you're doing as you're driving. Even eating a hamburger, drinking coffee, that becomes a distraction. These are all distractions. You cannot afford these distractions. You cannot afford to kill someone. I know of one case, now this was years ago, the person was distracted. There's no backup camera on that particular vehicle because this was before that became standard in almost all the vehicles. But that person killed their grandchild. And I didn't know them personally, but I knew of them because we lived in a small town at a time. And it wasn't the only time to have that happen. Again, if you're distracted, someone is going to die. And if it's not you, it's going to be somebody else. Stop. Think. Focus. Pay attention to what you're doing. All right? Be safe out there. Bye-bye now.